14 months.
Well, good day, everybody. Today, my name is Tony Maplesden. Today, John Fotherby and I would like to talk about two related pieces of work which are designed to support collaborative delivery on construction projects. The ECITB Project Collaboration Toolkit, which can be accessed via the link you can see on the screen here. I believe it's also listed within the event resource list. And I think you can also access the toolkit link if you were to visit the ECITB virtual booth within the exhibition area. The second piece of work is the ECI Collaboration Working Agreement, which both John and I have been working on over the past year or so. And also, although still a work in progress, it is getting pretty near to completion now and should be available for use soon. But firstly, if I can just, for the avoidance of any confusion, although closely related, ECITB and ECI are two separate organisations. The ECI in each of the organisation acronyms mean different things. So ECITB is the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, which is the UK organisation responsible for skills development training, also for setting the standards for skills development and training in the UK, in accordance with the Industrial Industrial Training Act. ECI stands for the European Construction Institute, which is a membership body for European-based organisations engaged in the delivery of industrial plan projects worldwide. So we had an excellent introduction from Jay this morning, so I'm not going to spend too much time on our respective backgrounds, but John's career spans in excess of 40 years in the process industries in a variety of roles. He now advises executives, organisations and those involved in engineering construction projects around the world. He's been advising and dealing with contract disputes and has much experience with the kind of conflict and adversity that can result from traditional contract approaches. John's pretty well known for being a straight talker, so be prepared to hear it how John sees it. As for myself, before developing the Project Collaboration Toolkit on behalf of the training board, I also had a career spanning 40 years in engineering, project and business management. Although I'm not a contract strategy or a contract expert as John is, I've certainly had some experience of projects that have been pretty uncomfortable in terms of some of the adversarial behaviours that have been exhibited and some of the wastage that's resulted on those projects as a result. So now I'm going to pass over to John. John's going to give you some background and context to explain the thinking behind the creation of both the Collaboration Toolkit and the Collaborative Working Agreement, which we can refer to as the CWA, if that's okay. So over to you, John. I'll move the slides on at your prompt.
Right, okay, Tony, thanks. Well, next slide then, please. Okay, so the traditional contracts, let's think about the language that they use. First of all, as an industry, we've got a legacy. It's well established. There's a large number of projects that fail to meet the business objectives. Now, whether that's on time, delivery, increase in price, issues about startup and performance and quality, and even some safety issues, and certainly questions about forecasting what's going to happen on projects. So these are well established, and we don't have to discuss the percentages or anything of project failures. That legacy exists. My question is, if the contract language was effective, how come we've got these failures? So, there's plenty of language in the contracts that these projects have had, and they've produced nothing really. So I think that typically the contracts contain adversarial language, and that in itself, I believe, signifies adversarial intent, and it most certainly creates and encourages adversarial behavior. Now, I'm not saying that every traditional type of contract suffers from these problems, but it is reasonably common. And of course, when we have adversarial behavior, we end up with some really easily recognized conditions. Preservation of self-interest, we get into disharmony, we have disagreement, we have delays, we have cost overruns, we end up sometimes in disputes. And you know, some research that the CII did a while ago in connection with OS2 suggested that up to 10% of project investment costs were wrapped up in disputes and claims, which can be quite considerable. So I come to the conclusion that the language of the contract is actually not really that important. What's important is the behavior. And I'd just like to quote the CEO from ECITB, Chris Claydon, in the introduction to the Project Collaboration Toolkit, which Tony's going to talk about in a few minutes. And Chris says, to say, let's collaborate will not work. There has to be clear objectives, clear expectations, and effective process to understand and establish the behaviors that may be necessary to make it work. Completely agree. It's all about human behavior. So can I have the next slide, please, Tony? We tend to talk in this industry about the projects for facility plant development. But in reality, we're really talking about business. The project, if we want people to change mindsets, we have to change the context in which we're having the discussions about the investments. I remember a presentation that Stephen Mulver made at an ECI conference, I think it was in 2017, where he said we need to get away from the focus on projects and start thinking about what we do as an industry in the context of businesses. Now, there's some mutual interest here, I think, between investors and owners, people who are developing plants, and the supply chain, because at the end of the day, they're all stakeholders. The vendors and contractors are delivering what the owners want. The owners provide work for the vendors and contractors. So there's mutuality there. And it's all about business success. And if we start to think in that way, we start to take a different view on what the roles are in projects. So can I have the next slide, please?
Sorry, John, there's just a little bit of a delay on the slide movement.
Not to worry.
There we go.
Thank you. So if we start thinking about the business imperatives, what the stakeholders are looking for is value-added investments. The owners want the plants to function and produce the products that they will sell and improve their business. And the supply chain are wanting the same things. But in any relationship like this, we've got different views, we've got different interests, and nevertheless, we need to drive maximum efficiencies. And it was mentioned today that the industry has a 57% wastage. It's absolutely staggering. And therefore, we must be looking at driving maximum efficiencies. We need to do that effective behaviours coupled with modern technology. There's been some discussion about AWP, and I completely agree with it. You know, we need to be utilising AWP, but that's not all. Let's think about digitalisation, BIM, design for manufacturing and assembly, standardisation, off-site manufacturing, and so on. There's a lot of initiatives that are going on at the moment that really contribute to improved performance, to efficiencies, to wastage reduction. And that's what we have to look at. The interesting thing is that in all of these issues, the red thread is collaborative working. And I think it's an innate human condition, And I recall yesterday, Paul was talking about the pleasure of working in a collaborative environment. So we're quite happy to work together. And also, you know, there was a discussion yesterday about collaboration tends to be at its zenith when we're in a crisis. Well, I think this industry is in a bit of a crisis right now and has been for some while. So if we're thinking about business, why don't we enhance our business performance through collaborative working? Tony, do you want to talk about the Project Collaboration Toolkit?
Yes, okay, John, thank you. So if you haven't had the chance to take a look at the Project Collaboration Toolkit, this is what it looks like. You know, this is effectively the front cover that you'll see. It was developed and launched in 2016 in response to circumstances in the UK energy sector at the time, the crashing oil price of late 2014, and the need to improve project delivery performance and efficiency in order for the UK oil and gas industry to continue to successfully compete for investment. Although there's been a bit of an upturn in oil price of late, I mean, those imperatives, I think, still exist in the sector today. Most of the large energy companies have committed to supporting the energy transition and the UK government's commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. But you know, oil and gas, you know, the exploitation of remaining hydrocarbons in the UKCS still has a role to play, and it's critically important that you know, through effective collaboration, those resources can be gained as efficiently as possible. So there's a need for more collaborative project delivery strategies, and that was recognised by the project practitioners, you know, around about 2015, after the oil price crash. But those practitioners were really looking for some guidance on how to achieve greater collaboration on their capital projects. So what is the toolkit? Well, even though it's organised into 4 discrete phases, and it generally follows the life cycle of a typical project, it has the look and feel of a workflow. It isn't a set of project procedures. If you've had the chance to have a look at it, you'll probably realise that it provides guidance through its content, the tools and elements within each of the phases on how to establish appropriate relationships and behaviours, and it provides a platform upon which trust can be built for successful collaborations to be based on. And I'm not going to spend too much time going into any depth about toolkit content. It's probably better for you to spend some time looking at it yourselves, but briefly, phase 1 is about setting up an appropriate environment for collaboration to succeed. Now, this is probably the most important phase within the toolkit. Setting up an environment for collaboration isn't easy, and lots of organisations will need help with it, because for many it involves a change in organisational culture. If you're a company owner or a contractor that has been around long enough to be steeped in traditional adversarial transactional styles of contract, it certainly isn't an easy transition to move in the direction of win-win. So it could be tricky, and you're likely to meet a lot of resistance from parts of your own organisation, functions within your own organisation, who become accustomed to doing things the traditional way. Phase 1 can therefore be thought of as a route map with a set of tools for establishing the environment and starting to build trust in relationships between the parties. And I'll just mention 2 elements in particular in phase 1. There's an element there which talks about assessing collaborative capability. Now, there are a number of different ways of doing that. The Institute for Collaborative Working has a methodology for self-assessment of collaborative capability, which is linked into the work that they did associated with the preparation of ISO 44001. But there are other approaches, but it's an important step, because if you're new to you know, the thinking around collaborative working, you really need to you know, take an honest assessment of whether your organisation is mature enough and has the capability to be able to make the collaboration on the project a success. So an important step, and I think something that Richard alluded to yesterday when he was talking about the core framework. The second element, because this is a contracting summit, the phase 1 of the toolkit does have a step in there, item 1.7, which is establishing contracting principles. Now, the toolkit talks about the application of a contract style, which is built around risk benefit. But it's interesting that the pilot projects that have worked with the toolkit to date, with the exception of one, have chosen to actually proceed with pretty traditional types of contract. The one exception is a project that's formed an alliance between all of the delivery partners. The project's still running. We're expecting it to be complete in Q4 of this year, and we're very, very keen to sort of understand and get a share from the project of what they have achieved. But Paul, in his presentation yesterday, mentioned the Brent Bravo topsides decommissioning project, and that's another of the toolkit pilot projects. That project just used a straightforward reimbursable contract form with a KPI register that offered the principal parties to the collaboration an opportunity to earn additional margin if they exhibited the right kind of behaviours and clearly delivered an appropriate performance. So the toolkit does address the type of contract to be used, and I would just finish there by saying that if your project, or if an element of scope on your project really needs to work collaboratively to deliver the available benefits, then you certainly wouldn't use a transactional contract form. Transactional contract forms, because they don't rely on alignment between the parties, there's no attempt to actually align to a single set of objectives, really results in an expression of self-interest at different times. So I think Alison used the phrase this afternoon, best for me mentality and behaviour, and unfortunately the transactional contract forms will give you that kind of behaviour rather than the behaviours you'd like to see in an effective collaboration. So phase 2 provides tools aimed more specifically at setting up a project collaboration for success. It addresses the approach and behaviours that should be adopted when selecting the team, establishing and aligning to project objectives, managing risk, and agreeing project processes, standards and specifications. In the important area of scope and change management, it looks at the behaviours and the protocol for managing change rather than the procedure. And this, of course, is an area which has high potential for disagreement and dispute on conventional contracts. Phase 3 can be viewed as a set of tools aimed at ensuring efficient performance of an integrated project delivery team. And the benefits of integrated project delivery have got a lot of airtime today. I think the approach that the toolkit advocates and the work that John and I have been doing on the CWA certainly reflects some of the things we've heard on the I2PD initiative during the presentations today. The toolkit talks about benefits of integrated working. It seeks to eliminate inefficient and wasted effort through role duplication and man-to-man marking by promoting a single team approach to both manage and control the project, a number of different areas. Some of you may have similar past experiences to mine, where owner clients have deployed big teams of people to merely monitor the performance of other partners in the project, all because there's an absence of trust. So phase 3 aims to eliminate these kinds of practice. And finally, phase 4, it's all about learning from the collaborative project experience. What went well, what didn't go so well, what could be improved. all important items of learning, hopefully in readiness for the next undertaking. Paul used the expression yesterday, more work for good work, and hopefully if the project's been successful through the adoption of a collaborative strategy, then those who've actually supported it could probably benefit from additional business. And so, as John said earlier, in early 2020, he and I both agreed that there was perhaps in the area of the availability of a multi-party form of working agreement, something that was missing, something that could be developed based upon the principles and content of the Project Collaboration Toolkit. And so we set about creating the ECI Collaborative Working Agreement. So I'll now pass back to John and ask John to explain to you some of the fundamental principles of the CWA. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Tony. Yes, at the launch of edition 2 of the PCT, the industry representatives, and there's quite a few of them at that presentation, at that launch, were saying we're working with the PCT in its original form using the traditional contracts, but we really would like a contract that marries to the PCT. Is there one? And so we basically said no, but you can have one. I'm not quite sure that Tony and I realised what we were taking on when we said yes, we can do it. Anyway, it's been good fun and it's been very interesting. So the first thing we did was to see, rather than reinvent the wheel, what was available. But we started with the Project Collaboration Toolkit. This is the operating system for collaboration as far as we're concerned. We've seen it working. There's been a lot of work done on it to improve it with revision 2. It was refined. The fundamentals didn't change, of course. So what married to, in terms of existing contracts, to the PCT and its fundamental principles? The short answer was nothing. All the contracts that we looked at didn't really get to grips with the issues that are set out in the Project Collaboration Toolkit. So we had to start with a blank piece of paper. But we were guided by those principles in the PCT. And the first thing we did was to look at what was needed for industry practitioners to have a contract that reflected, that enshrined, that was built upon the practices, the processes, the requirements of PCT. So the first point was that we have to start this contract from a certain position, and it is that the project delivery stakeholders have committed to work collaboratively. That means there must be a process that precedes the actual development of the contract by the project delivery stakeholders. They must have been sorted, and there must be that unequivocal agreement to work collaboratively. So there's a process to go through there to get to that stage. The next step then, of course, is to enact collaborative working, and the best way to do that is by the project delivery stakeholders, whoever they are, to actually agree upon the contract that they're going to work by. And there's a certain amount of psychology comes from this. If you get people, if you consult with people on things like this agreement, and they are able to contribute, then the more likely chance there is of them actually adhering to the damn thing and working with it and respecting the other partners and their needs and wants within that agreement. So that's a fundamental thinking for us. Now, you might ask, who are the project delivery stakeholders? And, as any good lawyer will say, it depends. It really depends on what the project is, what you're doing, but the criterion that we believe is really fundamental is that the project delivery stakeholders should be those parties that can contribute to and influence the outcome of the project in terms of successful delivery, on schedule, costs, safety, quality, predictability, etc. So that's how we looked at that. So we thought this needs to apply to almost any sort of project, business venture in plant development, regardless of size or what it is or where it is. So we should have some basic rules that will not change, keep them simple, so some general conditions type issues, but let's enable the project delivery stakeholders to be able to formulate their contract on the basis of details contained in schedules, many of which are linked to the provisions in the general conditions to elaborate upon those. And we deal subject by subject through those schedules, so you don't have to go searching through pages and pages of a contract to find out what the subject matter is. So we've got about, I think it's 22 conditions of contract and about 11 or 12 schedules, Tony, right now, through the revisions that we've got.
Yeah, that's correct, John, yeah.
Fundamental to this collaborative working agreement is, in common with all the collaborative type arrangements, is no blame, no claim, dispute avoidance procedures, and if there is default by a project delivery stakeholder, then they're removed by the other project delivery stakeholders. And that's very common to what was discussed this morning. We also believe consensus decision making is the way to go in an arrangement like this, where, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about the organisation in a minute, but where you have a group of people coming together to do business in the sense of delivering a plant, a facility, then in this sort of arrangement, you can't have someone that's constantly calling the shots. It's got to be done by the project delivery stakeholders making those decisions. Of course, there has to be incentives to expedite those decisions, and this agreement contains those. It's very much incentive based, and it's incentive based upon innovative practices, and the focus is on completion and value for money. The investor or owner wants to bring his plant or facility into operation as soon as possible. Just that's it. They start making money. That's part of the business aspect. But equally, the other project delivery stakeholders also need to be finished quickly, as soon as possible, and without incurring additional costs. So it's about efficiencies. It's about doing things very, very effectively, driving a quality delivery and really value-adding performance to the businesses. Whether you're an investor, an owner, or whether you're a part of the supply chain, doesn't matter. We go back to the business aspect. We've developed a fairly flexible commercial model to accommodate any sort of project. It really is a pretty open. We've left the schedules that deal in the detail for the project delivery stakeholders to compile these, but there's some very clear and developed guidelines as to what they should do as far as each schedule is concerned. And then risk allocation, the schedule, budget, all determined, agreed and managed by the project delivery stakeholders. Get together and you determine what this looks like, and you know, it depends on what the scope is at the time, what's known, etc., etc. You develop it collaboratively. It's completely open book. And the remuneration, we're looking at positive cash flow. The one thing that is really bedeviling the industry is bad cash flow across large swathes of industry, and that's not good for the supply chain. They need cash, and therefore this is geared to paying, but on the basis that they get paid their costs during delivery, the rewards are remunerated on completion. All parties therefore have a real focus and interest on when completion takes place, because the owner gets his plant, the supply chain gets their rewards out of the money that's left over in the budget from their efforts. So we then have to look at how the management arrangement around the collaborative working agreement. Tony.
Thank you, John. Let's see if I can get the slide moved on. Oops, there you go. Apologies for the delay. So there have been a number of standard forms of contract development as standalone legal frameworks without any initial consideration of the importance of behavioural change. And not surprisingly, the success and take-up of some of those contract forms has been rather limited. John and I believe that the approach to developing the CWA is unique in the sense that it first embodies the essential elements of behavioural change that are captured within the Project Collaboration Toolkit. And it's therefore based on the guidance that the toolkit provides in that area. There are some of the, John's covered some of the principles upon which the CWA is based, but there also are a number of, if you like, management practices that also reflect the way that the toolkit sets out its guidance. The first of those is, you know, the concept of succeed or fail together. So if it's going to be a collaborative arrangement, win-lose is not an acceptable outcome for a collaborative project enterprise. Although some project stakeholders, the owner and the client, or the project lead entity, as the toolkit refers, may have different entitlements to some of the other stakeholders, all of the collaborative working agreement stakeholder signatories have a say in the way that the project's managed. As far as team selection is concerned, the principle of best person for the job is cited in the CWA as the way for building competent, integrated, capable teams. So as we mentioned earlier, it seeks to avoid, in the same way that the toolkit does, problems associated and wastage associated with role duplication and other practices symptomatic of lack of trust. The CWA places an obligation on signatory stakeholders to work towards creating a suitable environment between them in which collaboration can succeed. And as mentioned earlier, when talking about the toolkit, the CWA embodies the same approach in focus on behaviours when dealing with change to avoid the take-up of self-interested positions. And two final examples, the CWA looks to introduce efficiency and avoid duplicated effort in the way that quality, safety, health and environmental considerations and project reporting are managed by the integrated team. Although within our industry, I think there's a great, genuine and natural collaboration effort goes into those areas, particularly safety and health and environmental management. There's quite often a little bit of inefficiency introduced by each of the parties to the project introducing their own standards, their own site auditing type procedures, and that can become confusing for some of the work teams on site. So, as I say, the CWA I think seeks to streamline the approach to single team management to make sure that the project is as efficient as possible. So I think our final slide. So just to sum up, the Project Collaboration Toolkit is available now. It's ready to download free of charge. That link will take you to the ECITB website, from which you'll also be able to view and download the case studies that have been developed for pilot projects that have run against the toolkit to date. And the collaborative working agreement, we've had it out on a second peer review recently, and it's also been subjected to a legal compliance review, which we've just got some of the the responses in for. I think in the spirit of collaboration, we've also asked Richard and some of his core colleagues to take a look at the CWA and give us their views and comments, which we would expect to see quite soon. So our aim is to actually be in a position to publish the CWA in the third quarter of this year. I don't know whether you want to say one or two final things, John, just in terms of how we'll make the collaborative working agreement available, and how we might actually give access to the agreement to anybody who's interested in looking at it, who might be part of the current summit.
Yeah, our plan is, once it's ready for publication, is for it to be free to users from the ECI. So that'll be a question of, similar to the Project Collaboration Toolkit from ECITB, it will go to the website and download. I think the more important thing about both of these, the PCT and the Collaborative Working Agreement, is the actual implementation and the induction into how these are used. And there's been discussions today and yesterday about the need for facilitators in this sort of environment, and that's what we're going to make available, to be able to run the PCT and the Collaborative Working Agreement in parallel with people that want to use it. So in that spirit of development, we're planning, for those that are interested, to dig a bit deeper into both the PCT and the Collaborative Working Agreement in some free webinars between now and the end of September, and we'll be publishing those shortly. And it's really to take people into a bit more detail, because you'll appreciate that in a presentation like this, it's fairly high level, and I'm sure some people have got quite a lot of questions about it. But it really is about getting into the behaviors that need to be exhibited in order to make both of these tools really effective. And I think the other thing is that in developing the Collaborative Working Agreement, we're really taking on board what we were learning from the AWP community and others about the need for contracting platforms that accommodated those also pretty important processes. So it's, one thing that we want to avoid as ECITB and ECI is segregating. I think the industry does that quite well into factions. It's about coming together and seeing how all of these attributes can be utilized, and from my point of view, get that very large proportion of wastage that was very well presented today, get that down, and we can, because it'll make the industry far more effective.
Okay, John, thanks. Bob, I'm going to pass back to you. I'll stop sharing the screen. I think we've probably taken a little bit more time than we perhaps should have done.
While you're passing it back, we have time to give you each a question, and then we'll take all the other questions that come in at the end of the next segment, which is Phil and Rod. So we'll have a little bit of time there. Actually, for you, John, what guarantees are there by adopting collaborative working agreements and the project collaboration tool that there will be significant improvement in productivity, cost, and delivery times compared with those achieved with traditional contracting agreements?
Well, I think, first of all, there's no guarantees. This, I keep stressing the point, this is about the behaviors of the players that are involved in the agreement, first of all. So it is primarily about human behavior. It is about people making the effort to shift, to change the way in which they perceive the projects and the way that they want to work together to achieve outcomes that are beneficial to all the parties playing on the project. And it was mentioned in earlier presentations, it's for the benefit of the project, or I prefer to look at it as the business venture in the delivery of the plant, but it's sharing in that business success that is really key. And it's down to the players. A contract cannot guarantee anything. We've seen that from the traditional contracts with their adversarial language. We've seen the legacy, so we don't need to say anymore.
Another question is, based on European experience, how long does it take an industry to shift from a traditional combative to a collaborative environment?
There'll be those that do it fairly quickly, and there'll be those that take forever or never. Again, it's about that mindset and willingness to change to improve. So you can't force people to do this. This is not, you can't say you are going to be collaborative. I think Paul McGregor said very clearly yesterday, it is not prescriptive. You cannot force people to do it. They have to want to do it. And I think our job is to make create the opportunity that they can fulfill that want.
Yeah, I think if I can just add to that, John, I think if we look at oil and gas in the UK, I'm convinced that there is a genuine move towards more collaborative, practices. But we have seen, Paul mentioned a project yesterday, the Andrew project, which goes back into the 90s. That project was a great success, but it was insufficient in itself to be able to shift the culture within the industry to actually sort of continue to take that approach. Oil and gas in the UK over the 50, 60 years that it's been about has tended to go around in circles. We've moved in the direction of new practices and then moved back to the old traditional adversarial style of contracts as soon as the economic pressures come back again. So I think there are signs of lasting change, I think, within the sector now, but it is early days, and every now and again we get a reminder that it's very, very easy for some organisations just to drift back to the way that they always have done things. Yeah.
Terminal 5 was cited as an example of a collaborative contract, which it was. And there's two things to say about that. The follow-up project, Heathrow decided to go back to traditional methods because somebody had a great idea that it was going to be, why should we share all the benefit with the contractors? Which was a bit sort of prehistorical. But the other thing is that people might not be aware of that Heathrow team had, for the duration of the project, leadership coaches for their team. There were 5 of them, and I know one of them personally. And about the way in which those coaches were supporting the management team, not technical issues. This was purely about human relations and behaviours and how to get the most out of the contractors team in a collaborative way, because it was new to Heathrow. Why they didn't continue with it with the next phase, that's only they can answer. But overall, I mean, apart from the initial problems with baggage handling, it was a massive success.
Well, thank you both. We'll come back